I think that recovery means you don't have to be controlled by your past. It means that you've actually taken back control of your life. And for victim survivors, the whole point is they've lost that control. And I think that is just so important to be able to take back.
In May 2023, hundreds of people came together for the first ever Australian Domestic Family and Sexual Violence Recovery and Healing Conference. Over the 2 days, a number of speakers and presenters put aside time to create this video in order to share their knowledge and lived experience.
I work in the space of providing crisis responses to women and their children who've experienced family violence. And while we do what I think and I hope is really fantastic work, we're with women and children for a short period of time. We can help support their immediate safety and their immediate stability. We don't know what difference that work makes over the long term. We don't know if it's really helping to change their future to be a future free from violence.
If we don't do things when we can, then we respond to them and react to them later, which is often to the detriment of the person, their family, society in general.
What we can do if we are able to provide true recovery and healing support is to stay connected with women and children over the longer term, to connect them with all that they need, all that recovery and healing looks like for those individual people.
It's kind of a twofold thing. It's you get to learn that you can do it and you understand it yourself, and it's also having people who walk beside you and know you can do it and stick beside you. And I think those long-term people that I've had in my life that have just gone, I believe in you, I can see, that you could be an advocate.
We know a lot about what needs to be done, and where we get the best intelligence about what we need to do to help with people's healing and recovery journey, which is not a straight line, is to listen to people who have lived and living experience.
In my case, I had a domestic violence at home. When it first came to light, I was in denial and I didn't want to deal with it. And all of the focus went away from me because I wasn't ready to do any counselling. And it actually took about 10, 15 years before I was ready to do that work. And when I was ready, I was so grateful that there was a free counselling service for women who had experienced domestic violence here. And I went on the waiting list. It still took years before my name came up, but I'd already waited so many years. And when my name did come up, that counselling was absolutely invaluable to my healing and well-being.
I know myself, certainly, I didn't want to seek counselling support when I lost my mother to domestic violence 8 years ago, but I know that oftentimes you do eventually feel that I need help and I want to speak to someone, or I want to deal with this in my own way, and ensuring that there are people who are trauma-informed, who will be receptive to what you have to say about how you want to go about your recovery journey. That's really important.
It's finding out what works for each individual person and not just doing, okay, you're doing counselling, so that's going to be your recovery. It's actually going, well, what is it that brings recovery for you?
What we are actually talking about is people wanting to actually do the work. The work is not easy, and the victim survivor journey is not linear, and we need to stop expecting victim survivors to actually behave in a particular way. There is no such thing.
But I think one of the things that I've struggled with is anger and the way that we are repelled by anger. We don't tolerate anger, we don't acknowledge anger, and we shame people who have expressed anger. And for me, I feel that this is a really important part of understanding someone's journey, that there is reason to be angry, and it is a justifiable human response to so much there is a reason to be angry about. And I think that that's one of the things that I struggle with. Not being able to contain my anger at times, and then the shame and loathing I feel for it to surface, and then realising why wouldn't I be angry?
What we need to understand is that when we fail to consider recovery and healing as part of the journey of somebody who's experiencing domestic, family or sexual violence is that it compounds. But many people will develop coping strategies within domestic violence situations. That's why we say we lead a client-centred and client-led support mechanism, because they know best how to keep themselves safe. So we have to work with people to help them to recover in the best way for them.
The one thing that we need to understand about someone wanting to recover after escaping family violence, and I want to highlight the word escaping. We don't leave, we actually escape, and often with our lives nearly intact. What happens is you turn to the system. What is the system made up of? Family violence service providers, police in your local jurisdiction. You may turn to other forces like Centrelink or Services Australia, whatever it is that you may need. What happens is often these systems, one, they don't speak to each other. Two, they actually perpetuate more of the same type of behaviour that you have endured and survived with your perpetrator.
Psychologically, for the survivor, it's critical that they feel like someone's actually wanting to help them, not hinder them.
I turned to that wanting support, and what I got was a perpetuation of a really ugly behaviour and conduct, which really brought up those feelings of my inadequacy and all those things the perpetrator told me that I was. Useless, hopeless. But then I had other things where, oh, you're very articulate, you'll be right. So I felt minimised either way.
It's obvious, that violence, doesn't end when the police are called or the perpetrator goes to prison. There are many, and it continues, with systemic abuse through the family law court system and others. But ultimately, I think, the fact that recovery is a journey. It's a journey that for some may take the rest of their lives, and they may, as we may judge what recovery looks like, they may not become the person they could have been or have the life experience that they deserve.
What survivors tell me really makes a difference is when all of their needs are being met, not just the mental health effects of violence and abuse, but also the physical effects and the psychosocial effects and some of the complexity around engaging with the criminal justice system, child protection services. All of those things affect health.
What I got was hope that I can regain my employment, hope that my finance is going to improve. So I was given financial counseling, that my medical support is going to be there, that legally whatever happens, there is an end to it. Like there is going to be an end. It's not going to be forever.
So when all of survivors' needs are being met in a comprehensive way, they're doing so much better and they're recovering so much quicker.
And it's those, that insecurity, whether that's financial or housing or emotional, that perpetrators really prey on. They target people who are insecure, who can't leave, who can't escape, because that's how they trap you and they control you through those levers. So unless we're providing victim survivors the means, the buffers, the mitigating factors and the protective factors so that they can't be taken advantage of by people who would, by people who use abuse, by people who seek to control others through power and force and violence, then we're never going to end domestic, family and sexual violence.
And for those women that are experiencing poverty and disadvantage, which is often an outcome of experiencing family or domestic violence, women can't afford to prioritise their well-being. The potential that they have to, gain a job or go back to study is significantly impacted.
If you're constantly living below the poverty line, you're now being traumatized by a system that is meant to pull you up. Instead, it's holding you down, because if you're homeless, if you're constantly counting your pennies to decide whether you should eat or whether you can buy medication, there is absolutely no way you can begin your recovery journey. And to live in poverty is another form of trauma. So if we're completely serious about recovery as the fourth pillar in the national strategy, we must lift income support and we must have a lot more affordable housing, because housing is also fundamental. Without shelter, you cannot get anywhere. You can't rebuild your life if you're living in a car.
Navigating post-separation abuse, which can come at you, and in my situation, it's came from the perpetrator, members of his family, and then the system, was actually such a shock to me, more so than the domestic violence I had endured for 14 plus years in that marriage.
Many years after I left, I'm now at year 8, I'm still suffering post-separation abuse. And for me, what that looks like is having lost my kids through the family court system and then having the perpetrator with custody of them.
We don't manage risk well within the family court, and especially with the new Lighthouse project, I'm seeing problems. In a recent matter in Brisbane, a mother who had a former partner who was convicted of domestic violence and attempted murder, and that previous history and her experience of domestic violence was ignored, and she lost her child for trying to protect her.
So I left, I had the courage, I was brave. I'd tried to leave so many times before then. I had services around me. I had access to Staying Home Leaving Violence program, and I held people for that initial crisis response. But since then, there's been nothing. And since then, my family and friends have moved on, services have moved on, and they're helping their next client, but there's no one to help me 8 years down the track where this violence continues through the use of the family court or other systems. So child support, post-separational financial abuse, where assets were supposed to be divided up equally and fairly, and they just weren't, and they got away with it. And as a survivor, the only way to claw back that money was to spend a ton of money to get back what I was already entitled to.
It's fantastic that we fund the refuges and the safe places for women to flee, but we shouldn't have to flee in the first place.
Post-separation violence needs to have a society that acknowledges that this is a men's problem.
If I am hiding in plain sight as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and trauma, then my perpetrator is also hiding in plain sight as a law-abiding citizen. We need to start seeing trauma survivors without our rose-coloured glasses, that we believe that someone that looks and acts like me surely couldn't be a trauma survivor. Because when we have those rose-coloured glasses on, we also enable perpetrators to do harm because we look at them with the same lens, that surely that great guy down the road couldn't be a perpetrator.
And so much of the policy around domestic family and sexual violence actually makes victims the problem. Like, how do we stop victims, being abused, or how do we respond to victims? And that's not the question that we should be asking. We really need to be asking, how do we end the perpetration of domestic and family violence?
And what we are doing at the moment isn't working, and the stats reflect that. Last year was our worst year yet with the amount of women we have lost.
If we invest in ending the actual perpetration of violence, then we're actually going to stop the harm that's being done to victims, and we won't forever needing to be funding refuges and crisis response, because we will actually be reducing the problem of perpetration and reducing the harm that's done to all of us as individuals, but to society and beyond.
So many of the drivers of violence against LGBTQ+ people are the same as the drivers of violence against women. And I'm thinking of, that rigid gender norms, gender inequality, attitudes that normalise and condone violence, inappropriate, jokes about gender and sexuality and rape, sexual violence and domestic violence. All of those things help perpetuate this culture, this rape culture. And if we can address all of those drivers of violence for communities, it will help us all in the long run.
So if we don't also try and attempt to change the attitudes in the community, we will not be able to address the long-term recovery and healing for women from different communities who do take action, who do want to recover.
The reason that's so important is because when we talk about women from migrant and refugee backgrounds, we silo them so many ways. We talk about culture, we talk about language, we talk about faith, we talk about all these different components, and then we also talk about their permanency in Australia or lack thereof, or we don't acknowledge or recognise second and third generation Australians as needing that deep cultural and faith-based empowerment as part of their healing and recovery. It's about looking to the internal currency of the heart that connects us all as human beings and is truly transformational.
So for our community, intergenerational trauma is a significant part of where the healing needs to begin. And to have a space that we can talk to the generations that have had this passed on through their cellular memory, that we can grow strong from a young age, is a way that we can help prevent any trauma reoccurring into the future.
3-year-old me didn't understand what all the yelling was about, but knew that she felt scared and sad when she saw her mummy crying.
When we talk about violence against women and children, we talk about it against women and children. We don't talk about it against women and children.
4-year-old me knew that she had to stand in front of her mother to protect her from her father's fists. It was also at this stage that she knew to brace for impact when her father would throw her like a rag doll into walls.
My dad was a survivor himself, and then he just grew up to recreate those same familiar environments.
5-year-old me knew to put her little sister in another room and close the door, protecting her from the sights and sounds of violence.
I can see the pattern, I understand it. But little Emma, as a kid in the 1980s, had no support. There was nothing. I would go to the counselling appointments with my mum and sit in the corner and play with toys.
It's important in regards to the human rights of the child and recognising that there are different interventions and supports that are needed because complex post-traumatic stress disorder has a massive impact on the biological development of children's brains and their ability to have relationships and understand safety and security.
The biggest impact that we could make if we do want to end family violence within a generation is to support those kids and support them well.
And while I continue to live with the pain and suffering and trauma of my childhood, I wish my mum on every person and all of the other protective parents that do what they can to support themselves and their children in times of absolute devastation.
I remember one time we went to see the lawyer and he said that I have a voice but not a choice in the matter, and that made me quite upset because I wanted the full decision and not strangers to be able to control my fate essentially. I felt more like a witness, if that makes any sense, than someone who's actually going to be affected by what the end result is.
The decisions that other people are making for you.
Yeah.
It is time that we recognise that domestic, family and sexual violence needs a lifespan approach. So it needs to include younger people as well as older people. Let's take a look at the older women in aged care. How can we talk about healing for them when there is absolutely no recognition that they are being sexually assaulted and need assistance? In the last quarter of 2022, the report to the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission on sexual assaults in aged care numbers 52 a week across Australia. In a research report that was done a couple of years ago, providers said that in 58% of sexual assault cases, there was no impact on the victim. When their experiences are being marginalized, when they're being told, oh, well, just because she has dementia, it doesn't matter, she'll forget it. And it doesn't matter whether you have a cognitive impairment, the body remembers. So when we have attitudes like that, how can we talk about recovery? And it is a gross injustice that the experiences of older women in the final stages of their lives are completely invisibilized.
So I specialise in working with women who have a disability but have also experienced violence, and we did some research 7 years ago and learnt that women in that situation were really not getting the proper help they needed. They weren't being listened to. Everyone wanted to talk about their disability but not about what had actually happened to them. I wanted to treat them as though they were different kinds of survivors. If we could just get on with the healing, it'd be really good. If we could stop having to fight all the time for basic human rights to be, respected.
It's important that we as a society have structures and support services in place to make sure that people have somewhere to turn when they are ready. And I think that's really important that we are seeing a greater shift towards recovery, not just crisis or crisis response, but ensuring that there is that support right through the continuum.
Putting recovery and healing into the national plan has given us a national focus, has given us a call to action, and has made visible the community and the work that goes on in long-term recovery and healing that was not really visible before, that wasn't invested in before, that governments couldn't see what was happening, and we didn't have the connectivity or the way of coming together. And to build on that, to really establish a community, to make it visible to government, to put lived experience at the centre, to say what we need to rebuild security, to rebuild our lives, to thrive after abuse, is we need funding, investment, visibility and understanding of what it takes to recover and heal from abuse and the very natural response of trauma, which is injury of abuse, in the long term.
The opposite of healing and recovery is intergenerational trauma. And we know what the cost to individuals and the system and our community and country is of intergenerational trauma. The costs in terms of lost productivity in the workplace, the cost in terms of individual children not being able to meet their full potential. We can make a huge difference to interrupt intergenerational trauma if we focus in a very mindful way on healing and recovery.
The budget is a choice that we make as a nation to fund what is important. If we can give billions and billions of dollars for nuclear submarines, if we can subsidize fossil fuel to the tune of $2,000 a minute, why can't we fund the support for women and children fleeing violence?
Something that I've noticed more recently is that so many more corporates are wanting to get involved now and to help women and children who are recovering from domestic and family violence. And to me that's so exciting because it is that recognition that it's a whole of community problem. It's not something that governments can just solve, it's not something that organisations can solve. It's up to all of us to become involved to help women and children impacted by domestic and family violence flourish.
This is a real opportunity and a responsibility for us to make real change, to enable women to have access to care that supports their health, their healing, supports them as parents, and prevents further abuse and trauma.
There is a real freedom that we can get in recovery. It may not be that we all get to the same spot in how we do it, but that sense of really feeling free in who we are, free to be who we are and to not be controlled by what other people think and not be controlled by how we should do things and just start to go, this is me and this is okay.
It's okay. Be raw, be real, feel the pain. Let it out, don't suppress. Don't be brave. Be that tragic person that's just lost their son. You don't have to be brave. You don't have to be anything. I think on many levels I'm now a human being going through life. With their ups and downs, their regrets, their insights, life. I don't think I'm dragged into the abyss of the huge pain of being that tragic victim of someone surviving the worst thing that a mother could ever experience. So I feel my mental health is good, not perfect, I have my ups and downs, I have my self-doubts, I have the journey that most of us are on. So that's where I feel my recovery is. But, and you know, there may be a day or a moment in a day where there is a memory or something that will hit me and tears will come, but it doesn't debilitate me now.